Okay, you can go.
All right, excellent. Thank you, everybody. I would like to now officially call our first CFC meeting of the school year to order. And Lisa, could you please call the roll?
Of course. Ms. Alfano?
Here.
Mr. Anderson? Ron?
Oh, I'm sorry. Here.
Ms. Cleveland?
Here.
Mr. Kowski?
Here.
Mr. Davis?
Here.
Ms. Guerrero?
Here.
Mr. Henry?
Here.
Dr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Kolar?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Sador? Ms. Cole? All right.
All right, and I do believe as a board committee, I need to read this blurb about public content, given that we are virtual and not in person. So if you can indulge me for a minute. The state of Illinois continues to operate under a disaster declaration related to the COVID-19 worldwide pandemic. The health department continues to advise the community to practice social distancing, wear face masks, and avoid unnecessary contact with others. Based on the current public health concerns, I, Dr. Gregory Johnson, as head of the public body, do not believe it is either practical or prudent to hold an in-person meeting of the Community Finance Committee meeting on January 18th, 2022. I further believe that it is neither practical nor prudent for the public to be present at the public body's regular meeting location. We will continue to hold a remote meeting with updated practices to comply with Public Act 101-640 that was signed by Governor Pritzker on June 12, 2020. So pursuant to that public act, since the meeting cannot be conducted at the regular physical location due to the health crisis, alternative arrangements have been made to allow any interested member of the public to hear all discussions, testimony, and roll call votes. So with that said, the final order of kind of logistical business before we get started is regarding visitor comments. So Lisa, do we have any visitor comments?
No visitors' comments.
All right, so now we have a few discussion items and some tasks that we have to take care of today. So first of all, let me just say on behalf of the district, thank you all for dedicating your time for not only this conversation, but the conversations that we are going to have over the next several weeks. I know that this is time that you are taking away from your families and your lives, as on behalf of the district, it's really quite appreciated. We have a number of items that we want to take care of today by way of kind of introductions, just to kind of get us situated into what this meeting is going to be. But we also have today some important discussion items and some real advice that we want to pull from everybody regarding at least two specific items. And really, actually, we could break it down into three as a slideshow that we have later on is going to illustrate. So with that said, I know that Alyssa Alfano, our Director of Finances, is here today, and she is going to help us through some of the initial items for the meeting. Tom, I'm going to defer to you just for a moment here too, because I know you have been instrumental behind the scenes in getting this committee meeting off the ground. So before we turn this over to kind of the general introductory items and and all that information, is there anything else you'd like to, anything you want to share with the group?
Yeah, there is, but I want to keep the time short. So first of all, I echo Greg's sentiments and thank our community members for your engagement, your voice in this. Today, in addition to addressing specific, getting input on a couple specific things, we really just want to try to frame up what it is that we're going to do and kind of put a calendar and get some of the roles going. So, that once we kind of do that, I think things hopefully will start taking shape. But I really am greatly appreciative. I've been involved. I'll introduce, since I've not met. I've been a board member for 9 years and been involved in the finance with different committees, and am very excited to have this format, which is really a board committee that's public with the voice of our community represented. So thank you.
Should we do introductions so everyone kind of gets to know each other really quick?
That would be helpful, just. to-
Okay.
Yep.
So my name is Alyssa Alfano and I'm the Director of Finance. I was on the CFAC committee. So now that it's the CFC committee, I'm still on it. So I've been with the district for about 3.5 years now. So next person who wants to go.
You know, Alyssa, why don't you call on somebody so
Okay.
we can get it, going smooth.
Okay, Ron, do you want to introduce yourself first?
I'm Ron Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Operations. I've been with the district going on 2 years.
Greg?
Yeah, I'm Greg Johnson, the superintendent. Again, thank you all for being here.
Other Greg?
Yeah, my name's Greg Cullen. I served previously with Steve on the prior iteration. Congratulations, Liz. I didn't realize you were director of finance now, because I remember you you had just started like 3 years ago when we were on the CFAC committee. So I didn't realize she was the director. So I've served on the prior CFAC board with Steve, and then I also serve on D97's finance committee called Fork. I've been on there for like 3 years now, or 4 years. I'm not really sure.
Steve?
Excuse me. As Greg mentioned, I also previously served on the CFAC. I've worked in school finance my entire career as a school district auditor. I held Alyssa's role at OPRF a couple decades ago, and have spent more recent years as a consultant and a financial advisor to school districts all over the state, including OPRF and D97. So I spent some time at those Fork meetings at District 97 also. And in my current role, I'm a product manager for a data and analytics software company that provides software for thousands of school districts throughout the country. And I'm excited to join the new iteration of CFAX. So.
Cal?
Hello, I'm Cal Davis. I'm a board member in D90, serve on the finance committee, also on the finance committee for EdRed, and also on the executive board of youth services for the Oak Park River Forest Township. I do construction management consulting for a small group in Chicago. We're working at the tollway and the airport right now.
Petra?
Hi, everyone. I'm Petra. Last summer, we just moved back to Oak Park with my family after having been gone for 5 years, 3.5 years in Shanghai, China on an expatriate work assignment, and then 1.5 years in the Philadelphia area. I've worked in finance, mostly in manufacturing for over 25 years. Most recently, I worked as director of finance for a global specialty chemicals company. And I'm very excited to be a part of this the committee, and excited to help out wherever possible.
Miss Cleveland?
Hello, everyone. Melissa Cleveland, Oak Park residents. I was born and raised here, and now I'm raising my family here. I do have a freshman, Husky, at Oak Park River Forest High School. My finance background stems in banking. I've been in banking 20 years, working on the business side and on the retail side. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Mr. Henry?
Hello, everyone. Echoing Tom's and Greg's words of thank you for serving and taking the time to do this committee. I'm a first-year board member, Oak Park resident, parent of a former Husky. I have owned and operated project management consulting business for the past 7 years, and that takes a lot of budget and finance projections, things of that nature. So I was pretty excited to help or join this committee with Tom. I think it's been very valuable insight as you go for making decisions as a board. Yeah, that's it.
I believe, did I get everyone? Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Evans. I am new to the position of executive assistant to the superintendent and clerk of the board. I am transitioning with my counterpart, Gail Camerton, who's also in this meeting. Been going on working for Oak Park for almost 18 years. It's coming February, and I'm looking forward to work with each and every one of you.
Thank you. So just some basic information about our committee is we will have 2 board members, the CFO, an ADA member, and 5 community members. You guys are just expected to do 1-year terms for a maximum of 8 years. We're planning on meeting only 4 to 6 times a year. So we'll kind of go through our annual calendar in a second, but we do expect you to attend the meetings. Really 2/3 should be the minimum. And we're gonna start sending out materials ahead of time. So for those of you that were on our last committee, sometimes we always didn't send them out ahead of time, but we want you to look at them in detail. So when we come to the meetings, we can stick to like a 1 to 1.5 hour meeting and we can go straight to discussion. So we don't have to really go through a bunch of items. So for the annual calendar, if you go to your packet on page 8, these are the topics that we're planning on covering and the timeframes that we're covering them. And they just kind of go in line with how we're presenting information to the board and just the general operations in the business office when we start working on these projects. So generally we will give you guys the information before we give it to the board. And then, so pretty much we're gonna go through our evidence-based funding model, facilities and financing, the budget, our tax levy and 5-year projection, and then any other topics that are needed. So if everyone's all right with this, if there's any other topics that you feel that we need to cover or add to the list, please speak now.
Lisa, if you wouldn't mind, could you also, for if anybody's watching this at home and wants to follow on, doesn't necessarily have the packets, could you open up the slide deck and just kind of show on the shared screen there, beginning on slide 6. It lists those topics out. Thanks.
Okay, I guess we are on to our topics that we need to cover in tonight's meeting. So firstly, we are going to cover the tax levy. So back at our December board meeting, we approved our 2021 tax levy. We are taking the full 1.4% CPI and about 15.2 million of new property. So we're expecting a 1.95% increase for a total levy of $74.8 million. Now, a new legislative item that has happened recently is the recapture levy. And this allows us to take lost tax revenue for property tax appeals over the prior 12 months. We need to discuss this with our bonds, but just to kind of give you some quick information, we can either take the levy, or if we do not want to take it, then the board has to pass a resolution. So we're expecting $822,000 from this, which is about $39 on a $445,000 home. And so if the board does not act on it, then the county's automatically going to extend this levy to us. So we really have 2 options. We can either take it or we can abate it back. So just to give you some background, we have not budgeted for this at all. We generally assume that there's going to be tax appeals when we go to take our levy. So we have not planned on taking this at all. A couple of our other neighboring tax districts, D97 hasn't made a decision yet. They are going to talk about it at their February meeting. District 90 is planning on extending the levy. And then the Oak Park Park District is abating the levy back. So before we discuss this in detail, I want to talk about our bonds first. So we're kind of going to skip around a little bit. Originally, we were going to talk about the comparative districts, but let's go ahead and talk to the bonds. So if you want to follow along in your packet, if you go to page 28, is what was actually presented at last week's committee of the whole meeting. So to kind of quickly give you some background, I hope you guys all read it in detail, but the board has asked administration to prepare debt options for our district. And we're looking for feedback from you guys and a recommendation so we can get this approved at the next board meeting in January. So keep the tax recapture levy in mind when we're looking at this, since it is a taxing item and debt could potentially produce a taxing levy as well. So, and if you need to review our 10-year maintenance plan and project 2, just go ahead and go to the next couple of pages of the packet if you want that information. So our recommendation, we spelled out in the memo some different debt options that we've considered, and our recommendation project 2, but we also need to take CPI in order to do this. So does anyone have any, like after going through the memo, does anyone have any comments or kind of discussion items they would like to talk about? Because we as a committee have to come up with a recommendation.
I had a couple questions.
Okay.
One is back to the abating of the recapture levy. Is that something that you've talked to your attorneys or the county about yet? Because my understanding was that the county was not allowing districts to abate that. At least that's what I'd heard through some Illinois ASBO circles. And I think they're working on a follow-up bill to change that, to allow it. But as of now, at least supposedly Cook County says they can abate that. I don't know if you've heard any of that conversation or not. It's on the agenda for tomorrow's IASBO Delegate Advisory Assembly meeting, so I may have some more info for you on that tomorrow.
Yeah, I heard of that, and I think we're assuming that we're going to be
But that's going to get cleared up
yes,
in the next few months.
It's really because timing. If we have till April 1st, that doesn't give us a lot of time to discuss it at the board level.
Yeah.
That's why we're discussing it now.
I know it's especially been an issue for some South Cook districts with really high tax rates already and a lot of appeals that don't want all of that automatically coming on. And so I think they're working with some legislators, hopefully to change some of that up. But I'll, if anything comes up at that meeting tomorrow, I'll pass it on. My question related to the debt recommendations was primarily just curious if there were any conversations about utilizing DSEB for this or not, and kind of why the recommendations didn't go that direction.
Yes, we did discuss that. We just felt that the 20-year debt certificates put us in a better financial place with project 2 and our 10-year maintenance schedule.
I mean, I guess you could say it has less of an impact on the taxpayers because you're not levying that, but when you've got it kind of set up as, well, we're going to take the high CPI and use it for that, maybe I don't know if it's a wash or not, but it depends on if you would take the full CPI if you weren't doing the debt. Because I think, I'm sure Elizabeth talked through this piece too, but it seems like the debt certificates are going to have a higher rate and borrowing cost than the bonds might. So that was one of my questions. And then also just wondering if it was more a matter of just not wanting to go that route at this point, given what happened the last time tried to do the DSEB borrowing and got petitioned.
Yeah, we certainly had that conversation about going to the taxpayers at this point for DSEB bonds versus debt certificates. Also, you know, Steve, I know you know very well, and I'm sure others in the call are at least familiar with the fact that we have, you know, a sizable fund balance at this point. And so debt certificates basically, you know, relies on, at least in the immediate sense, it relies on that, right, to make sure that we're going to be able to to pay those off. And then we see what goes on with CPI. Well, we know CPI is going to go up next year. I've heard various predictions about what that is. There's, that's uncertain. That's also 11 months away. We don't quite know how that's going to play out. So that uncertainty as well was a factor in the recommendation.
Well, CPI is locked in now. That came out last week. So
last week
we went over the 5% max in the tax cap. So you're going to get that 5% if you choose to levy it in December.
Okay.
That makes sense. Did you look at any financial projections, kind of how the debt schedule would impact the 5-year forecasts in having these conversations?
Yeah, and we can make it work. We didn't produce all this information because it's the last few times we've done that. I think it was information overload.
Yeah.
So once we get the recommendation, then I think we would present our projection.
Because the last time the old committee looked at the projections, I think we had put in a lot more capital needs than we had in previous iterations. So this is probably just a bit of a swap of debt for capital spending in those numbers to some extent.
Yes.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any comments or concerns?
I mean, I'd like to offer some input and perspective, but I don't want to take away from questions.
Alyssa, I have a question. What is meant when it is said that it's not included in the budget? So you didn't anticipate in your plan, you didn't anticipate that you would get this.
For the recapture levy?
Yeah, for the
So I believe this legislation was passed in August. And so originally when we go to do our levy, we always assume there's going to be tax appeals. And we generally assume there's going to be like $800,000 of tax appeals. So it's pretty much spot on. So we actually, when we extend our levy, so this year it was $74.8 million. We assume we're not going to collect 800,000 of that levy. So we don't budget, like we don't assume we're getting this money. So if we decide that we're not going to take it, then we've never expected it to, we've never budgeted for it. So it's not going to hurt us regardless.
It would be a budget surplus.
Yes.
Because we budgeted, I think you said, Alyssa, we budgeted at about 98% collection, or the number. Oh, she froze.
And rate is like right at 98.6%.
So is this mostly residential or commercial? The appeals usually, or do you know?
I believe it's mostly residential. Most of our taxes come from our residents. Anything else? Any other questions?
Alyssa, so I was going to add some more. So the $800,000 here, and I'm trying to pull up the Excel file. So it's actually split the cost. So it's part refunds from PTAB, and then part certificate of errors. I recall the total number. I think it was like 50-50. So it's like certificate of errors are mostly on homeowners. So it's typically exemptions that they don't get. So like you can file like a 3-year. So like say you don't have a homeowner's exemption on your house and you've lived there for like 3 years, you can go back 3 years. And a lot of people, when they buy a house, the exemption comes off for some reason. So there's like, that's like $75,000 or not 75, $5,000 per house. If they file an exemption, they get that back in a year. And then I think there's like senior senior exemption. So that's like an
Yeah.
additional like $1,000 a year, and you can go back 3 years on that if you're over 65. And I can't remember the other exemptions that have happened. But those are so I think it's 50-50. I'm just trying to pull up the spreadsheet from the, let's see, District 200. So I can tell you the exact amounts.
Yeah, and they
maybe.
just make mistakes every once in a while too.
Yeah.
Because I know
Yeah,
I didn't get my homeowner's exemption this year for some reason.
Yeah. So if you pay so like in her case, if Alyssa pays the bill, and she can go back now and file the certificate of exemption, even though she paid that money, and she can get that money paid back later to her. So I think that's where the other half of the 800,000. I can't pull it up right now for some reason, but yeah, I think it was about 50-50 between the two.
And the PTAB piece is probably mostly commercial, but the certificate of error is residential. So it sounds like a fairly even split.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, and I'll add, even though D97 hasn't talked about it, because I'm on their finance committee, we talked about it off prior. So D97 right now was leaning towards not taking that, and that was their, like, because theirs is worth $1,097,000, and so they were leaning towards not taking it, just because we usually include in that levy, we have that loss in cost factor of 3% that we include every year, and typically Oak Park and River Forest, even in years where someone doesn't pay on time, with back taxes and that loss in cost factor, so if you go like some of the older years, like 3 or 4 years after the fact, you'll see that the levy collection is like 102% or 103%, because we eventually recoup that money when someone buys a property and pays it back taxes on it. So I think that's why they're leaning towards that, because it's like extra money that they don't, like you said, they don't budget for. And we also have in the past historically gotten additional money by including that loss in cost factor, which is supposed to account for stuff like this with appeals and stuff like that.
And we did not include that for this year's levy.
That being the loss in cost?
Yes.
Steve, I want to go back. I want to make sure there's no other questions. So there's a lot of different kind of decisions embedded here. One is this, what's it called? The 102. What's the name for the
recapture levy?
That's it. That's a good name for it. The recapture levy. So the recapture levy is more of an immediate decision for the current levy, right? That we just made.
Right. That's a one-time thing that doesn't roll into future levies, unlike everything else related to the tax cap.
Yeah.
So it's a one-time thing.
And Steve, so you said if the state or the county indeed says we can't abate, could we still abate a different way?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like I anecdotally heard some conversations from some districts about this at the III conference a couple months ago, and it wasn't really sure. There just seemed to be a lot of questions and no answers coming from the county at that time. I haven't heard in the last couple of months if there's been some clarity. I just saw the agenda for the IASBO legislative group that's meeting tomorrow has it on the agenda, or a trailer bill that's designed to help clear up some of this confusion as a topic of conversation. So
okay, so more to come. Yeah, because in the past we have done kind of where we were abating our debt. We were doing that, after the fact, but we don't have. So I think one thing for the group to understand, which I don't know, is what's our current debt position? Because we're talking about getting bonds, right? So can you talk to that, Alyssa, just in terms of perspective, what the district's position is?
Yeah, so we do not have any debt. So I believe we paid it off in fiscal year 2018. December 2017 rings a bell on our last payment. We are eligible to borrow. Sorry, I closed out of my figure. Let me find that amount for us.
Okay. And while you're doing that, I'll just add a couple other points. So, and it's more of a historical perspective. I kind of tend to be that historian dude. So the district, basically, starting in 2013 and going to 2018, we had, I believe it was DSEB bonds that we abated our debt, basically not taking any of the revenue from the taxpayers because of a strategy in the district to right size our fund balance, which had grown rather significantly in the prior to that period. So we for about a 5-year period, we abated, I don't know, $2.5 million a year in debt. And then, as Alyssa said, in 2018, it was done. And, I guess, Steve, I'd like you to talk to the kind of the more normal process that districts go through of kind of then re-upping with DSEB bonds to kind of do the next tranche of capital or such like that. We still had a fund balance at the time, 2017, 2018, that was not really something we felt we could go to the taxpayers and say, we need more money. We had a good chunk.
Yeah, I just did a quick query in the tool that I work with on a regular basis for work, just to kind of look across the state. Because the other district is in an unusual position. Just to do a quick bonds 101 for the benefit of the group. There's really two ways to borrow. One is this, what we're calling DSEB. It's the debt service extension base. It's a non-referendum borrowing option that's available. And there's an annual tax amount that's the cap on that. And then the other is through referendums. There's roughly 850 districts in the state, and 775 of them have some kind of bonds outstanding. So the districts, in the less than 10% of the districts in the state that don't have debt currently. So that is a unique position. And the fact that they were paying that off with balances in years past towards the end of the life of the last bonds, rather than levying it is pretty unusual also.
Our debt limit is 184 million. Are there any more comments or questions? Tom, did you have more to add?
No, I guess, it's just a pulse of what the community members might say on, so there's really, in my mind, two questions. One, should we, what's the sense on incurring debt, right? And then what's the vehicle by which to do it? And just so that we're clear, the recommendation is a recommendation to incur debt, to pay, to help fund the a bunch of the maintenance work that needs to be done, but to do it in a way that does not increase any tax levy to the community, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the kind of the simple version. And Steve, you asked the question, and the real why there, and Greg, you can chime in, is twofold. One, timing is always everything, right? And if you look at next year's levy, you've got 5% CPI, which we haven't had in how many years?
Never,
30?
never since the tax cap.
Okay,
came in.
never. So we're in uncharted waters with inflation. And now you've got this new, and I'll never forget it, the recovery piece that would be more. And then, any debt that we did that would be DSEB would be beyond that, correct? So it would be a pretty change in direction, a pretty big jolt. Or could be. I mean, we still a lot of decisions on what to do there and how much CPI to take, all kinds of things, but it certainly is not a year like we've seen over the, like you said, since 1982, actually, I think is, and we weren't under, the current government structure then. So.
So you're looking for feedback both on.
Should we? What's your input on incurring debt based on what you know, or the questions you have? The problem with this process, just to be candid, is we're just trying to get we're trying to get your input now, realizing that this is somewhat out of order. I mean, we're just forming the committee, but it's just a chance to get voice. Whereas a much better process would be providing a lot more of the background and such upon which the decisions have been made. So it's somewhat not ideal.
Sure.
Okay? But it is, but we could just say no input and that would be undesirable. So go ahead, Steve.
I certainly think it makes prudent sense to match, long-term debt to long-term assets. I don't have any issue with borrowing at all. It does work out well that we've got this high CPI that can fund that rather than having to do a separate bond issuance through DSEB and that process. I guess what I would encourage the board administration to do would be, in the intervening 11 months or so before you pass that 5% levy, is kind of put together your list and have a really fine-tuned plan for what these projects will be, to help justify that. I think a lot of districts may find themselves in the place of having to levy less than that 5%. But I think if you've got the case to justify it, here's the projects we're going to do. Certain ones of these are life safety and they're required and whatever, and 100+ building, and just kind of have that case ready for the public to go with it. I think it makes sense.
So if you look on page 21 of your packet, that starts the list. It's the 10-year maintenance plan, and it's got some information on there with the costs and what the project is and kind of the why behind it, just to help clarify things.
Yeah, it's broken up into two chunks, a $10 million chunk of projects and another 10 million after that. The projects that you see there are really just listed in the sequence in which we had previously presented to the board in October for our 10-year maintenance. And so they shouldn't, as a result, be interpreted as, exactly the list of projects in that sequence or, configuration that would go. We would still need to work that through, but it gives you an idea of what those projects would be. And as you know, in a school district like ours, with a building like ours, projects come up all the time, as things continue to evolve and break and need repair.
I don't have an old 5-year plan handy, Alyssa, but what was the amount that we've typically had for just kind of the ongoing maintenance and upkeep stuff every year? And was it close to $5 million? That's the number that sort of is in my head.
4 million is what we generally were budgeting for. And then once we had this 10-year maintenance plan, we were trying to project out for the actual cost of fixing the building instead of just having $4 million, because $4 million wasn't enough to cover us. So stuff kind of got pushed off, and that's why we're in the position we're in now. Not the exact reason why, but some of the reason why. There's so much to do. So we're trying to accelerate these projects to get them done. And that's another reason for the debt certificates.
No.
I'm gonna, okay, I'm sorry.
Alyssa, with these, because you got a cost total here right now of an estimate of 20 million, obviously. With your you currently levy, I don't know what the levy breakout is. We have, and that's why I think Steve was asking about the prior years with 4 million in the budget. What of these projects, are any of these covered? Are these extra maintenance on top of what we already operate, the operation maintenance account that you levy for?
So these go above and beyond the $4 million. So
okay,
$4 million isn't enough to cover these items.
Okay. Yeah, so this is
Does
okay.
that
So this
answer
is
your question?
Yeah, that answers. Yeah, this is a beyond the normal 4 million that we already levy. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I was gonna say, and it's kind of a little bit of a plug from a timing standpoint. When we put our calendar together, one of the first things we hope to do is have a kind of a finance 101. And it's not meant to talk about the essence really of school finance, but it's meant to talk about D200, where we are, the history, how we got to where we are as it relates to many of the questions being asked. What's our debt history? What's our levy history? What's our capital expenditure history, so that you can kind of see the puzzle, which would certainly be more beneficial right now in going through this. So it is somewhat handcuffing, not knowing all that.
Are you also looking for some input on the 10 million versus 20 million borrowing amount?
We've pretty much, I think 20 million is the way we chose, right, Greg? Like, we're not really, are we still up for debate on that, or?
20 million had been where the conversation had settled, but Steve, to your point, it wasn't a topic that the board dove into a whole lot last Thursday. So if you have a take, give us feedback on that, please.
Well, I think that's mainly driven by how quickly you could do the work, and just looking at that short list, it is kind of spread out. There's a lot of sort of outdoor stuff and things like that. I thought I saw somewhere. Oh, here it is. Yeah, under the number 1 recommendations, it talks about the spend down requirements and all of that. So all of that from an arbitrage perspective comes into play. But if you feel like talking to your construction folks and Ron, that you can manage to spend 20 million fast enough, then I think it makes sense.
Yeah, and we felt confident we would.
Yeah, I don't know if Ron wants to speak to that more. There are, to that point, Steve, if you take a look at in the $10 million list of projects, the first chunk, you'll see reference there, the football field replacement, for example. We anticipate that to be about 3 to 4 more years worth of a lifespan for that. So that would put that, outside the scope of 85% at least that we would have to get done through a $20 million issuance. So it depends how much, those are the conversations we need to have, like exactly how we sequence that. And then the pricing for each of these too. These were estimates, to kind of get a feel for how they film the list. That all has to get, vetted a lot more carefully than it is, at this point, especially when we get them into a real to-do list.
Sure.
Does anyone else have anything they would like to add if they are okay with incurring debt?
That's fine. Is the district in deficit spending now or no?
No. Well,
Okay.
we have project one going on, so if you take that out, then no.
Okay.
But we have a lot we're spending for project one right now, so we are technically spending down the fund balance, but that was a planned thing. And we'll go through that with Finance 101 as well to show you how much we have left on project one and how much of our fund balance remains to be spent on project one. And then we've also got 20 million sitting aside for future capital. Anyone else okay with incurring debt? Or they have any other ideas that they don't agree with the debt certificates? We just want to make sure that we're recommending as a committee, we're all on the same page with, so we have something to bring to the board next week. And we were planning on, if we are recommending the 20-year debt certificates, that we would not be taking the recapture levy. Is everyone okay with that approach as well?
Wasn't there more of that, Alyssa? I thought like if you say yes to debt certificate and you didn't take the recapture, but you guys then were gonna just tax the max next year with the 5% levy, I think was also included, correct?
Yeah, so we would want to accelerate the 10-year maintenance plan. We would tax the max for the 2022 levy, and then we would not take the recapture levy.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know you guys have, I mean, levy discussions for next year are not happening, but just knowing that we're going to hit the 5% max this year because it's at the CPI ended up at 7%. That does concern me a little bit, just because if every district, everybody takes 5% next year, the max, you know, that's, I'm going to be honest, that's more than a typical shooting for 3%, as they always say. It's like the village entity takes, and like I know like corporate, you know, us in the corporate world, you know, raises are going to be only hitting at so economic raises will be like the 3 to 3.5 range. I think is going to be this industry average. So you know, if you're taking 5, you're hurting. You're taking other. But I know also, you know, you guys haven't. Is it up this year, Tom, or next year? The teacher contract. So I don't know where the teacher contract is going to end up. You know, I know D200 is still screwy. I know like D97, they changed, even though their contract's up, they changed the CPI method, but their CPI was capped, I think 3.5. Like they have a range of like minimum of 1.5%, a max of 3.5% of their contracts with CPI. So like if they take 5, that's, you know, that's a 1.5% more than their, you know, teacher raises would be. So, and you know, salary and wages are pretty much the main driver of most why you need to take a CPI index increase sometimes. So that's just some of the things I'm seeing of concern related to that piece of that.
Yeah, so our faculty senate is up in June 30th, 2022, and our CPAs as well. So we've got 2 that are up.
Alyssa, did I see this right? That the estimated annual debt service on the $20 million borrowings of $1,275,000, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and so 5% on your roughly rounding $75 million levy brings in $3,750,000. So you've still got a lot of growth there to cover wages and other inflationary things, I think. So.
I mean, just to play kind of what if, right? So the other option would go a DSEB route, right? And take a lower, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the same amount of money, right? That you probably, the community that you can stomach, right? And the question is, what's the right vehicle to do it? And really, they're the three levers are the levy, the bonds, and the recapture, right?
Mhm.
Are the three pieces that are there, with the third one being new.
Anyone else have anything to add with their comfort level of debt and the approach of taking CPI this year? Because they go hand in hand. The way we can afford the debt certificates is to take the full advantage of CPI, or the 5%.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. So the 5% is projected for or locking for next year. So the only way we can afford to do this 20-year bond issuance is if we take the full 5% next year.
Yes.
I mean, I would echo Greg. That is a little concerning because I know salaries, not just union jobs for the teachers or whatnot, just traditional salaries are not rising at the same level. So, in essence, your dollar, what you spend is going to be worth less for some families. So there's not a three. If it do 3 or 3.5, it just won't work. Are you saying?
Well, we still are working on our negotiations, so we don't really know what the salary increases will be yet.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't quite give you an exact value because the contracts are up June 30th of this year. So we can make some assumptions based on prior years. But if we don't take the 5%, and depending on where the negotiations come out to, we would then, if we want to go this route, we would have to make some major cuts elsewhere to afford it in our operating budget.
I'd like to echo those concerns about the impact on the taxpayer too, but also acknowledge that we've got a budget conversation and a levy conversation between now and the board adopting the levy in December, where we can, and a 5-year forecast conversation as well, where we can look at all these numbers in a little more detail. And, I don't think the board's committing to levying 5% now. I think they're just acknowledging we have that flexibility to do that to offset this borrowing, but not committing to it, hopefully, yet.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We just finished our negotiations with teachers last year, and a new philosophy was brought up, is that teachers can't have the high end of their raise because of COVID and things had gone up and stuff. But if as a district, we can only levy 5%, well, if we give you 5%, then how do we pay the water bill and the electric bill? So the cap on teachers has to be lower because you have to have some type of wiggle room to pay all the other bills, insurance and things like that. And that's, I don't know, I guess I've been talking to people in other districts. That's kind of a newer philosophy that needs to come along unless they raise the cap, because you can't have teachers, low end 2%, high end 5% in case there's 7% inflation like there is now, because then at that point, there's no money left to pay any other bills. And this isn't, and I explained to the teachers, this isn't IBM or Amazon, you're on the back of the taxpayer or the resident. So everybody's you get a raise every year. Amazon and IBM don't get a raise every year, but so everyone's got to be a little bit more flexible with, the increases. So we stop at 4% and we keep ourselves 1% to pay bills if things do go to 5% or 6% like they are now. But I think the abatement recapture, a lot of people are calling it double taxation, because before, we don't know where the money came from. The county just took a hit or whatever, but now it comes back to the district. So if my next door neighbor got $3,000 off his taxes, the whole block's got to cover that $3,000, or the whole town basically. So people are calling it double taxation. So that's why they're trying to figure something out in Springfield right now. Also, they're talking about, I went to an ed red meeting a couple of weeks ago. They're talking about if you under levy for 5 years, you have 5 years to go back and recapture. That's something they're trying to do too. You have 5 years to go back and get 5%, so you don't have to do a referendum. But everyone's kind of against it because no one wants to hear about, we didn't pay that much this year, so now you're taking it back from us again. So there's all kinds of tax issues. I think they're going to pass something this year dealing with property taxes. They definitely want to, so they're looking at a bunch of different options.
Anyone else want to comment about debt or the recapture levy?
I'm not hearing anyone who's strongly in support of the recapture levy as I'm listening, just for some degree of universality from a input. Is that a fair statement?
I'm hearing that as well.
Yeah, I'm just, is taking what we're getting here, because we need to report to the board and realize that, this is just a little bit of input, before the final decisions are rendered.
So we seem comfortable with debt, with our 20-year debt certificates.
This is Melissa, and I think my main concern is just what this means at the end of the day for the property taxes, and I just see this as it could drastically increase them for the years to come. So that's my main hesitation, I think I'll say.
So you're uncomfortable with taking the full CPI next year?
Right.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, so I guess we all are agreeing on we are comfortable with the debt. Oh, go ahead.
Also just have a general question. There's a lot of those roads. It's hard for me to, judge. Oh, sorry. I was just saying there's a lot of those. Oh, sorry. Sorry, my connection is not so good.
We can hear you.
Okay. I was just thinking there's a lot of those opportunity projects on there. And it's hard for me to gauge, like, if we delay those, does that mean there's a chance that we don't need the levy or to issue bonds? Is that something that we know now, or we wouldn't know that until later?
We still have $79 million of project total. So those few opportunity projects won't cut a dent in the $20 million that we're trying to go for.
Of the projects that were listed in the 20 million that would likely be the configuration of that, the only one that falls into that opportunity cost is the corridor upgrades, which are listed at the bottom over 5 years for $600,000 per year. So, there's not a whole lot that's in that category.
But the board, let me just chime in, and again, sequentially, the board has asked for a special meeting that we're planning, probably in March, Greg? Or February?
It's February, Tom.
Okay.
Yeah,
February.
we're looking at an early mid-February date.
Okay. And the whole purpose is to review and stratify what the capital plans are. You know, I guess my statement would be, even with that, it will just, we're just trying to make sure that, you know, it aligns with work that was done in the past and that we have a good grasp on all the pieces. But with that said, I have no doubt that from a financial standpoint, we have, you know, $20 million of needs that are real and need to be attended to. It's just a question of what the whole puzzle looks like, that needs to be stratified. Craig, Kabrib, you can give your perspective as well on that.
Yeah, so during the last board meeting, I think it was Fred that brought it up. It was prudent to have a facilities meeting, just going over different projects to make sure we're on the same page with what we're really asking, what's been asked of the community to get behind and for the district. So I think I'll just, first of all, I just based on what our needs are, because the deferred maintenance we've done, what we had for a long time, apparently. I think that is a smart decision to do. Now, I am concerned about that 5%, just based on add more burden on taxpayers, particularly after or through the pandemic. But I think how we do that, just it can be fine-tuned. But what will be good for, I guess, even for buying from the community, will be having that special meeting. And it's going to be either early February, the dates that went out for a poll, I believe. But that being said, once I'll be more comfortable, once I understand the complexity of the projects we're asking for, the 20 million, then the rest of it as well, to make sure I understand fully what's being asked. But just based on what I'm learning, being on this board, is where we are from a maintenance standpoint. This has to be done, because it's been, can't get down the road for too long as it is. It's just, how do we do it? That's a comfort level for this committee. So when you guys give us recommendations to the board level, we can have those discussions more thoughtfully.
And you still have a facilities committee similar to ours that's of community facility folks that are advising on all this project work as well, right?
Yes, Ron leads that committee.
Yeah. Yeah. So we haven't typically, with the old CFAC, we didn't typically get too far into the details of the facility stuff, other than how it impacted the budget and the 5-year plan, knowing that group was going through it on a project by project basis.
You know, I don't know if this is a question for anybody in the room. There was, you know, some of the urgency that we have for bringing this to board right now and looking for a decision is based off of our understanding of interest rates. Steve, earlier in the meeting, you referenced interest rates being different for DSEBs, or moving up for debt certificates compared to DSEBs. I don't know if anybody want to chime in on that, but that would be helpful, because to Kabrib's point, you know, really sequencing these out and going to the board by the regular board meeting in January, which is a week from this Thursday. And so this is our definitive list, sequenced out in a way that we know we can produce it. It's not realistic, right? We're not going to be able to bring that to the board within a week. We would need several weeks, right, to really say this is exactly the sequence. So it would be good to hear what implications going to the board a little bit later, if I'm reading what Kabrib is saying here, would have on likely the interest we would be paying on any debt. I know that's a crystal ball question, but it'd be good to hear the feedback.
Yeah, when I mentioned rates earlier, just my experience has been that debt certificates tend to have a little bit higher rate than bonds because they don't have the tax levy backing. But that said, rates are still quite low right now for any type of borrowing. I think the fact that the state of Illinois has really gotten their budget act together has lessened the impact of the penalty that Illinois borrowers have had in years past as well. I was on a panel last week for a presentation, and one of my co-presenters did an economic update, and it's definitely the expectation of the markets that rates will be going up this year. So if you're going to do it, doing it more quickly is probably going to save some interest costs, as opposed to waiting till the second half of the year or beyond, based on what the economists are expecting.
Okay. But within a range of several weeks, for example, that risk is limited to a large extent, from what I understand you're saying.
I think so, because for the most part, the market's priced in the rate increases before the Fed makes them anyway. It's kind of taken into account both on the investment side and on the borrowing side.
Yeah, I mean, the counsel we got from from Elizabeth Hennessy, who is the one who advises us. I think she said, again, things are at an all-time historical low, big picture, but they've gone up a couple percentage. I mean, a couple basis points in the recently, but there's a little bit of gyration. But we're still at a historical low level, which is part of the rationale for having this discussion somewhat hastily. I mean, with this group, we've been talking about it as a board for the last couple months.
Okay, any other concerns, questions, input on our debt or our recapture levy? Okay. I guess we are comfortable with debt. We are okay not taking the recapture levy, and we
I don't think she knows she's
Yeah, I
frozen.
don't, she knows she's frozen. So
Because I mean, Greg, you're summed up. I think the three, just so that we can hear the summary, my feedback as I listen to, the input is, she said that okay, pursuing debt, not in favor of the recapture levy. I would, that one, there was some good comments on that, and concerned about 5% next year, and needing a lot more discussion and rationale. But Melissa, you back?
yeah, sorry.
Okay. You kind of went out, so I kept the ball in play.
Perfect. Okay, so we can go on to our final discussion topic, which I believe Steve and Tom have the information for this. We need to talk about our comparative districts. And to give quick back.
All right, Steve and Tom will take it.
yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Okay, I'll take the lead with Steve's input, just to try to set the stage for folks. As was mentioned earlier, we'll be initiating our contract negotiations this spring. Alyssa, you kind of went out, so we're
okay.
You're kind of you're off and on, so we're taking the ball from you. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So one of the first steps in doing that is to make sure when we analyze our district that we have what we consider to be reasonable peer districts, and who are they that we compare ourselves to as we make financial decisions and look at compensation and all of that. So, Steve, I'll bring you in quickly here. Historically, D200 has kind of maybe simplified or gone to just said we compare ourselves to NWPA, and then kind of do some sub-segmentation of NWPA. For those who are not familiar, I don't even know what it's, Northwest, what's the P?
Personnel Association.
Personnel, thank you. is a group of 23 or so districts that are basically your collar communities around suburban Chicago, and then now extending out into the northwest up near like Crystal Lake and places like that. It is not even all high school districts. There's some unit districts in there, et cetera. And when you really look at the economic position of those districts, some might be like us and some are not. And as we're making economic decisions, how do we do it? So we began the process of saying, who are we most like from as we look at the financial assessment. And so with Steve's help, and the administration started, we looked and set 3 criteria out there that were used to kind of compare ourselves to our peers. The 3 criteria are, 1, the size of the school. And the basic criteria we used was it has to be a high school district that's anywhere from half to twice as big as us. So we are 3,500 students. That means somewhere between 1,700 and 7,000 students would be somewhat of a comparable. That's the size criteria. The second criteria was the
Percentage of low income students.
thank you. And our percentage of low income students is somewhere just around it. Over the last few years, it's 18 to 20%. I'm going from memory. We'll look at the data. So that would be, again, from half to double that is the band used over a 3-year consecutive window. And the third criteria is looking at the evidence-based funding adequacy target. And what was that one, the boundaries were a little bit closer. Steve, do you have the number of ours? And we'll explain all this through time. But we're just
we had to shrink that. So we used 2/3 of D200s up to 150% of D200s.
2/3 to 3/2. So again, there's a band on based on what the state's, what our district's ability to pay is. So if you look at that, and I don't know, do you have these data sheets just to kind of click through them, the work?
Yeah, I would start with that peer group 1.
Yeah, Steve, why don't you take the ball, because you did the heavy lifting and this is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, this methodology is not something that we invented. We borrowed it from the D97 Fort Committee. It is kind of a tool that they used to find peers when I was working with them. Gosh, it's got to be 6 or 8 years ago now. They used district enrollment, low income percentage, and they were using assessed value per pupil as their community wealth measurement, because the evidence-based funding formula didn't exist at that time. But so here's the NWPA list as I had it. I've kind of highlighted OPRF at the bottom. It's in alphabetical order. And what I did was in the one column with no labels, kind of 2/3 of the way to the right there, is kind of highlighted why a lot of these districts aren't peers. They fall out of this criteria. And this is just looking at enrollment and low income percentage right now, not factoring in the EBF piece. So a lot of the districts are too big, like 211 and 214 are the huge northwest suburban districts that are 5 or 6 schools each. We took out Barrington, the unit district, and so on. And then a lot of districts, north suburban districts, their low income percentages aren't high, or either too low, like Stevenson and Deerfield, Highland Park, and Libertyville, Vernon Hills, or some of the maybe closer geographic peers, their low income percentages are too high, like DuPage 88, which is in Addison, that area, or like Proviso, their low income percentages is more than double also. So that was kind of just kind of saying it. For one thing, I think it's just too big a peer group to begin with, and then there's a lot of peers that aren't really like D200. So then I did.
And Steve, just the one, like the one that's always talked about. So we'll call the elephant in the room. Everyone always says Evanston, right?
Right.
And Evanston is like us in a lot of ways, but it is higher than it has a low income percentage that is just teetering on twice what we have.
Right. So they fit the criteria just barely on the high end in 19 and 20, but then in 21, even though their low income percentage dropped, OPRF's dropped even more, and so they're just slightly out of the range. I'd have no qualms of including them in the peer group anyway. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that was clear.
They fall out mathematically, but they're right on the bubble. Yeah. Okay.
And this is data I pulled from FiveSite, my analytics tool that I work with for work. We should have the 2022 data in another month or two, and we can kind of revisit it then. So that if we want to pull up the peer group number 2 group or file, what I did here then is I started out with a broader net. I threw it out to all high school districts in the state, applied the enrollment and low income criteria to it. And so what they did was take the ones that didn't get ruled out of group 1, and then it pulled in some other districts that haven't typically been included because they aren't part of NWPA. A couple of them are downstate. I think it's only 2: Hononegah, which is out by Rockford, and then O'Fallon, which is in the St. Louis suburbs. But it includes Manuka, Antioch, a couple other, Warren Township up in Gurnee, that weren't in the NWPA group. So I think this is a little more more demographically comparable based on the enrollment and low income. So then here, to get to the third group, I whittled that down, that list, using the adequacy percentage cutoffs that we talked about, the 2/3,
Go
3 halves piece.
If you just go back, because you have
there it is.
Yeah.
So using all 3 of those criteria, then we end up with a group of 8, including OPRF, 8 districts. So we'll talk about EBF, I think, in the 101 conversation, but the district is in tier 4, which are the quote unquote wealthiest districts under EBF. And so by applying that percentage, everybody who's not EBF ends up falling out. So we lose the couple downstate districts and all of the a lot of the other suburban districts that were in that group number 2. And so we end up this group of 8 districts. District 99 is Downers Grove North and South. Hinsdale is a 2-building district also. Lake Park is in DuPage County. Lyons Township, which is nearby. Main Township is I think a 3-building district, but their enrollment is declined enough that they meet the cutoff. Niles Township, I think, is a 2-building district. Glenbrook is a 2-building district, and then OPRF. And then I threw on, as Tom and I were kind of starting to have these conversations, I also included some student performance data as well. So I've got the meets and exceeds and average SAT scores for all the districts, just to kind of see where OPRF is at relative to that on the student outcomes as well. And they're kind of mid-pack, 3rd out of 8 across all 4 of those metrics. So my gut, when I kind of got through this exercise, my gut, when I looked at the list, said, that this makes sense. These seem right. It's, would I like to see New Trier and Stevenson and some of those on here because they're, such high performing districts, and that's a group we should be aspiring to be like? Sure, but from a more holistic perspective of comparing salaries and spending and other things like that, from a resources standpoint, I think this group makes a little more sense. You know, you can also have different peer groups for different types of analysis too. I think if we looked at per student spend across this group, there's going to be a pretty wide range as well, even though the adequacy percentages are fairly similar.
I appreciate using this group. It's hard to compare to 24 districts for every single metric. So I think this makes more sense. And then if we don't really like the metric we're comparing with these districts, we can always add on some if we feel that that makes sense in terms of like from a metric view. But I do appreciate this list. Thank you for putting it together.
Sure.
Steve and
Yeah,
Tom.
especially from a bargaining standpoint, where you've got to pull the 100-page contract for every district, and you're trying to find specific items, be it, you know, insurance benefits or post-retirement or whatever. It gets really cumbersome. The 5-site analytics that I can help you with, you know, we can kind of do whatever size peer group we want. But again, you get a little lost in the data the more districts you have there.
Steve, forgive me if you've already said this. Could you explain the 136% you have for the adequacy percentage for OPRF?
Yeah, so that's, you know, each year, last year being an exception because of COVID and stuff, that state didn't update it. But each year the state does a really long, complicated calculation
Right.
of what the district's adequacy level should be. And it's a per student spend that they calculate. And then they look at how much you're actually able to spend in relation to that and determine this percentage. So all the districts on this list have resources that put them above their target for how much they need to spend for an adequate education. And so every district has a different adequacy target based on their student demographics. So the higher your low income percentage and ELL percentage, the higher your target will be. And then everyone has a different level of resources based on your tax base and other revenues. And you compare those two, and that gives you your percentage. That percentage then puts you in one of the 4 tiers that determines how much new money you get each year when the state's adding dollars to the pot. So tier 4 districts get next to no new state aid. A tier 1 district at the other end of the spectrum is going to get a lot of new dollars if there's new dollars added to the budget. And so the goal of all of this is not to bring anybody in the tier 4 range down, but to bring the tier 1 and 2 districts up over time. And you can kind of see that that's happened over the last 5 years.
But
Okay.
Greg, I think, I don't know, maybe I'm reading your question, because the data
Yes,
in the state school report card,
that's my question.
right, doesn't quite align with this. Many of them are close. Ours is off rather significantly.
Yeah.
I believe ours in that report card is 109%.
That's exactly right. That's why
Is that just a timing? So I pulled the 2021, 2022 current school year percentages. The report card, because everything else in that is from last year, that's probably the 21 data. But they didn't update the calculations in 21, so it's really a 2020 piece, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
so
I can do a little more digging into that.
We just need to make sure. So I think going back, we just need to make sure we're using, you know, we for everything else, it's outlined pretty clearly. 20, you know, the enrollment, you have 3 years.
Sure.
For the adequacy, we just need to, you know, get the years, and we know that those numbers are changing. I don't think, you know, that's the one data point I saw that was and some of them were changed a little. Ours was the one that was the most significantly different. So it's
probably due to the property tax relief grant dollars. Maybe that rolled into the formula, and so your local resources went up. But I'd have to look. But yeah, I just pulled the most recent year. Just I guess to me, a 3-year average didn't seem quite right there, given the.
Yeah, that's fine as long as we.
But we can look at that a little more.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And I asked because of that, Tom, and also I just want to make sure that the percentage that we're throwing in for Oak Park, you know, we have more data, we understand more, and we've done some work with the EBF as a district. I want to make sure the percentage we're putting in there for OPRF is consistent to what we're putting in for the others, obviously.
Yeah.
So
I think there's a little. So
right.
I guess the the question just for the group at large is there any, so the approach here is to take, I would say, a financially based approach where we're using, school size is not financial, but it does affect the finances of a district, a big district and a small district. Your low income is based on your student population, and your adequacy is based on your district's ability to pay. So these are the metrics that were chosen, and this is what has been kind of whittled down to. Is there anyone that has any feedback that says this is kerflooey or different perspectives on it before we kind of move forward?
I'd kind of like everyone's thoughts on, do we adopt this system and then immediately modify it and include Evanston, even though they're slightly outside of the criteria too, just because of the history of comparing, not just even OPRF to Evanston High School, but the two communities to each other, the elementary districts to each other as well.
Waiting to see if anybody else is going to chime in. I'll just be very quick given the hour, 7:58 here. And you've alluded to this already, but the purpose matters for the comparisons that we're going to do. So when we think about, comparing districts for some HR purposes, right? That's different than something else. And so I like the idea of having different configurations that we can kind of toggle between depending on the question, right, that we're asking ourselves about our school and the exact point of comparison that we're trying to really make a decision on, the exact point we're trying to make a decision on. So, yeah.
The other comment I'll make, having looked at this, and actually I've begun pulling additional data on these districts, is that this is a group of 8, and we're pretty much 3 of 8, right? We're not. I mean, we're not high. We're not at the top. We're not at the bottom. We're kind of in the middle of this pack. As a peer group, there are a couple places where we might be at the top, but in general, we're in the middle. So I think that's healthy.
Tom, that is healthy. I think that's great. I have a question about where that 3 of 8, is that coming from the OPRF rank? That is really just a ranking of the percent meets and exceeds. Is that where you're coming from there?
Yeah, those values there are 3 of 8, right? So that's where Steve did that. But I think if you took that same rank and applied it to pretty much everything that you see there, we would be in the middle. Whether it's enrollment, low income, adequacy, we're in the middle of this peer group. So, okay. So the action here is to move this one to, this approach forward into the administration for their negotiating purposes.
And potentially others as well. So that's good.
Yeah.
There is one, I'm going to jump in here really quick, given I really do want to do our best to respect the time commitment that you've all given. So 6:30 to 8 is something I want to honor. I do want to point out, though, that one of the things, like the way we've ran the meeting today, is kind of me kicking things off, and then Alyssa running the specific items and so on. But we do actually want to have somebody who is a chair of this committee, and preferably we would want that chair to be a member of the community. So this isn't one that is run by a board member or by the administration. And so given the time, I don't know if we can make that decision right now, but it is something that we would want to do at the very beginning of our next meeting. So unless somebody says, no, let's make the call right now, I would ask people to just have that thought, spinning around in their head, and then we come back together. Let's make that call for that chair role. So So with that said, if there are no comments on that point, I believe we have exhausted our items.
Do we have a next meeting slated?
We're planning on meeting in March, tentatively the third week of March, if that works with everyone.
And is that going to be the Finance 101? Is that the one?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it'll help to give a good basis of OPRF before we go into any other topics, just to give some historical information and current financial information. I think it'll make things easier.
So that one will be more of an informative to the members, and then any, items that might creep up between now and then, if there's any discussionary topics.
Okay, very good. Any questions or comments before we close out? All right, then I believe,
We need to adjourn.
yeah, Lisa, we need a move to adjourn. Or anybody can chime in.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed?
No, let's stay longer.
Okay, thank you for your time.
I
a
thanks
good night.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.